DMT. DMT, or N N-Dimethyltryptamine, is a hallucinogenic tryptamine drug. It occurs naturally in many plants and animals, and is both a derivative and a structural analogue of tryptamine. Also known as the spirit molecule due to the intense psychedelic experience, DMT is used as a recreational psychedelic drug and prepared as an entheogen by various cultures for ritual purposes. DMT has a rapid onset, intense effects, and a relatively short duration of action. This can give its user the full depth of a psychedelic experience in considerably less time than other substances, like LSD or psilocybin mushrooms. Learn about this mysterious molecule in this in-depth new documentary, DMT. A psychedelic experience, commonly known as a trip, is a temporary altered state of consciousness influenced by consuming a psychedelic substance such as mescaline, LSD, psilocybin, or DMT. Psychedelic experiences are explained within investigative, learning, recreational, religious, mystical, and therapeutic contexts. The term psychedelic was created by the psychiatrist Humphrey Osmond during written correspondence with author Aldous Huxley. Osmond presented the word to the New York Academy of Sciences in 1957. It is derived from the Greek word psyche, meaning soul or mind, and delein, meaning to manifest, thus mind manifesting, the implication being that psychedelics can develop unused potentials of the human mind. US Army scientists first coined the term trip during the 1950s when they were experimenting with LSD. A prominent element of psychedelic experiences is visual alteration. Psychedelic visual alteration often includes the spontaneous formation of complex flowing geometric graphic patterning in the visual field. When the eyes are open, the visual alteration is superimposed onto the objects and spaces in the physical environment. When the eyes are closed, the visual alteration is seen in the inner world behind the eyelids. These visual effects increase in complexity with higher dosages, and also when the eyes are closed. The visual alteration does not typically constitute hallucinations, because the person undergoing the experience can still distinguish between real and imagined visual phenomena. In some cases, true hallucinations are present. More rarely, psychedelic experiences can include complex hallucinations of objects, animals, people, or even whole landscapes. Some research has found similarities between psychedelic experiences and non-ordinary forms of consciousness experienced in meditation or near-death experiences. The phenomenon of ego dissolution is often described as a critical feature of the psychedelic experience. Individuals who have psychedelic experiences often describe what they experienced as more real than ordinary experiences. For example, the psychologist Benny Shannon observed from ayahuasca that trip refers to the assessment very common with ayahuasca that what is seen and thought during intoxication defines the real, whereas the world that is ordinarily perceived is actually an illusion. Similarly, the psychiatrist Stanislav Grof described the LSD experience as complex revelatory insights into the nature of existence, typically accompanied by a sense of certainty that this knowledge is ultimately more relevant and real than the perceptions and beliefs we share in everyday life. DMT can be inhaled, ingested, or injected. Its effects depend upon the dose, as well as the way it is administered. When inhaled or injected, the effects will last for a short period of time, generally between 5 to 15 minutes. When taken orally with an MAOI or Maui, such as the ayahuasca brew of many native Amazonian tribes, the effects can last for 3 hours or more. In addition, DMT can produce graphic visions of mystical experiences involving euphoria and powerful hallucinations of geometric shapes. DMT is a functional analog and structural analog of other psychedelic tryptamines, such as O-acetylpsilocin psilocybin, psilocin, and bufotenin. In addition, the structure of DMT occurs within some important biomolecules, like serotonin and melatonin, which makes them structural analogues of DMT. DMT is produced in many plant species, often in conjunction with its close chemical relatives, 5-methoxy-N, N-Dimethyltryptamine, and bufotenin. Plants that contain DMT are commonly used in indigenous Amazonian shamanic practices. It is usually one of the main active constituents of the drink ayahuasca. It occurs as the primary psychoactive alkaloid in several plants, including Mimosa tenuiflora, Diplopteris cabrerana, and Psychotria viridis. DMT is also found as a minor alkaloid in snuff made from the virula bark resin, in which 5-methoxy-DMT is the primary active alkaloid. DMT is also found as a minor alkaloid in the bark, pods and beans of the Anodonanthera peregrina and Anodonanthera colubrina, which is used to make Yopo and Vilca snuff, in which bufotenin is the primary active alkaloid. Psilocin and its precursor psilocybin, the active chemicals in many psilocybin mushrooms, were found to have a similar structure to DMT. The mind-bending effects of DMT were first studied by the Hungarian chemist and psychologist Stephen Zara, who carried out research with volunteers in the mid-1950s. Zara, who later moved to the United States National Institutes of Health, had chosen DMT because his order for LSD from the Swiss company Sandoz Laboratories had been rejected. This was because the powerful psychotropic drug LSD was deemed to be dangerous in the hands of a communist country. DMT is generally not active when taken orally, unless it's combined with a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, MAOI or MAOI. Without a MAOI, the body quickly metabolizes it without causing any hallucinogenic effects. Unless, of course, the dosage exceeds the body's monoamine oxidase's metabolic capacity. Other means of consumption, such as vaporizing, injecting, or insufflating the drug, can produce powerful hallucinations for a short period of time, usually less than half an hour. This is because the DMT reaches the brain before the body's natural monoamine oxidase can metabolize it. Taking a MAOI before vaporizing or injecting DMT prolongs and potentiates the effects. Induced DMT experiences can include hallucinations and intense time dilation, visual, auditory, tactile, and proprioceptive distortions. There are also other experiences that, by most first-hand accounts, defy verbal or visual description. Examples include perceiving hyperbolic geometry or seeing impossible objects in the style of the artist Escher. Several scientific experiments have attempted to measure fanciful experiences of altered states of consciousness induced by drugs under highly controlled and safe conditions. For 5 years during the 1990s, Rick Strassman and his colleagues conducted a DMT study at the University of New Mexico. The results provided an insight into the nature of illusory psychedelic experiences. In this study, participants received the DMT dosage through intravenous injection. The results suggested that different psychedelic experiences can occur depending on the strength of the dose. Lower doses produced somesthetic and emotional responses, but not hallucinogenic experiences. For example, 0.05 milligrams per kilogram had mild mood-elevating and calming properties. In contrast, responses produced by higher doses of between 0.2 to 0.4 milligrams per kilogram were labeled by researchers as hallucinogenic, that elicited an intensely colored, rapidly moving display of visual images, formed, abstract, or both. Comparing to other sensory methods, the most affected was one's sight. Participants detailed visual hallucinations, fewer auditory hallucinations, and particular physical sensations leading to an out-of-body experience. They also reported occurrences of euphoria, calm, fear, and anxiety. These dose-dependent effects match well with trip reports anonymously posted online, where users report breakthroughs above specific doses. These breakthrough experiences often result in the user becoming completely or almost completely detached from reality and propelled into DMT hyperspace. It is here that most users report communication with entities, while doses slightly under a breakthrough dose have far less extreme effects. Strassman also emphasized the importance of the setting in which the drug has been taken. He maintained that DMT had no beneficial effects on itself, and that the circumstances of when and where people take it plays an important role. It seems that DMT can induce a state or feeling where the person believes they can communicate with other intelligent life forms. High doses of DMT produces a state that involves a sense of another intelligence that people sometimes describe as superintelligent but emotionally detached. A 1995 study by Adolf Dittrich and Daniel Lamparter found that habitual rather than situative factors strongly influenced the DMT-induced altered state of consciousness. In the study, researchers used 3 dimensions of the APZ questionnaire to examine ASC. The first dimension, oceanic boundlessness or OB, refers to the complete loss of subjective self-identity and is mainly associated with positive emotions. The second dimension, anxious ego dissolution or AED, represents a disordering of thoughts and decreases in autonomy and self-control. Lastly, visionary restructuralization or VR refers to auditory and visual illusions and hallucinations. The results showed strong effects within the first and third dimensions for all conditions, especially with DMT, and suggested strong instability of elicited reactions independently of the conditions for the OB and VR scales. Entities perceived during DMT intoxication have been represented in diverse forms of psychedelic art. For example, ethnobotanist Terence McKenna coined the term machine elf for the entities he encountered in DMT hyperspace, using terms like fractal elves or self-transforming machine elves. McKenna first encountered the machine elves in 1965 after smoking DMT in Berkeley. His subsequent speculations about the hyperdimensional space in which they were encountered have inspired numerous artists and musicians. The meaning of DMT entities has been a subject of considerable debate among participants in a networked cultural underground, enthused by McKenna's extravagant accounts of DMT hyperspace. Cliff Pickover has also written about the machine elf experience in his book, Sex, Drugs, Einstein and Elves. At the same time, Rick Strassman notes many similarities between self-reports of his DMT study participants' encounters with these entities and mythological descriptions of figures such as Cheo HaKodesh in ancient religions, including both angels and demons. Strassman also argues for a similarity in his study participants' descriptions of mechanized wheels, gears, and machinery in these encounters, with those described in visions of encounters with the living creatures and Ophanim of the Hebrew Bible, noting they may stem from a common neuropsychopharmacological experience. Strassman argues that the more positive of the external entities encountered in DMT experiences should be understood as analogous to certain forms of angels. He wrote, "The medieval Jewish philosophers whom I rely upon for understanding the Hebrew Bible text and its concept of prophecy portrays angels as God's intermediaries. That is, they perform a certain function for God. Within the context of my DMT research, I believe that the beings that volunteers see could be conceived of as angelic, that is, previously invisible, incorporeal spiritual forces that are engarbed or enclothed in a particular form, determined by the psychological and spiritual development of the volunteers, bringing a specific message or experience to that volunteer." However, some participants in Strassman's experiments also reported that some other entities could resemble creatures more like insects and aliens. As a result, Strassman writes that the experiences of his participants also left him feeling confused and concerned about where the spirit molecule was leading them. It was at this point that he began to wonder if he was getting in over his head with this research. Stephen Zara had reported hallucinations of strange creatures in a 1958 study in psychotic patients. He described how one of his patients, under the influence of DMT, had experienced strange creatures, dwarves or something, at the start of a DMT trip. Other researchers of the entities apparently encountered by DMT users described them as entities or beings in humanoid and animal form. Common descriptions were of little people like non-human gnomes, elves, and imps. Strassman and others have wondered whether this form of hallucination may be the cause of alien abductions and experiences of extraterrestrial encounters, which may occur through endogenously occurring DMT. Rick Strassman noted that participants in his studies, when reporting encounters with the alleged entities, have also described loud auditory hallucinations, likening them to descriptions of rattling and chattering auditory phenomenon described in encounters with the Hayoth in the Book of Ezekiel. For example, one subject said that the elves were laughing or talking at high volume, chattering and twittering. According to a dose-response study in human subjects, DMT administered intravenously slightly raised blood pressure, heart rate, pupil diameter, and rectal temperature. In addition to this, there was also a rise in blood concentrations of beta-endorphin, corticotropin, cortisol, and prolactin. Growth hormone blood levels rose equally in response to all doses of DMT. Melatonin levels were found to be unaffected. The potential for dependence on DMT and the risk of prolonged psychological disturbance may be minimal when used infrequently, as in religious ceremonies. However, the physiological dependence potential of DMT and ayahuasca has not yet been documented convincingly. In the 1950s, the endogenous production of psychoactive agents was considered to be a potential reason for the hallucinatory symptoms of some psychiatric diseases. This is known as the transmethylation hypothesis. In addition to this, several speculative but untested hypotheses suggest that endogenous DMT is produced in the human brain and is involved in certain psychological and neurological states. DMT is naturally occurring in small amounts in the brains of rats, human cerebrospinal fluid, and other tissues of humans and other mammals. Also, mRNA for the enzyme necessary for DMT production, INMT, is found in the human cerebral cortex, choroid plexus, and pineal gland, suggesting an endogenous role in the human brain. In 2011, Nicholas V. Cozy of the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health found that INMT, an enzyme that is associated with the biosynthesis of DMT and endogenous hallucinogens, is present in the rhesus monkey's pineal gland, retinal ganglion neurons, and spinal cord. Neurobiologist Andrew Gallimore suggested that while DMT might not have a modern neural function, it may have been an ancestral neuromodulator once secreted in psychedelic concentrations during REM sleep, a function now lost. A standard dose for vaporized DMT is 20 to 60 milligrams, depending highly on the efficiency of vaporization, as well as body weight and individual variation. Typically, this is inhaled in a few successive breaths, but lower doses can be used if the user can inhale it in fewer breaths, preferably one. The effects last for a short period, usually 5 to 15 minutes, dependent on the dose. The onset after inhalation is swift, happening in less than 40 seconds, with peak effects being reached within a minute. In the United States in the 1960s, DMT was known as a business trip because of the short duration and rapid onset of action when inhaled. DMT can be inhaled using a bong or even using an e-cigarette once it has been dissolved in propylene glycol or vegetable glycerin. Some users have also started using vaporizers meant for cannabis extracts, known as wax pens, to control the temperature when vaporizing the crystals. Changa, a DMT-infused smoking blend, is typically used in pipes or other utensils intended for smoking dried plant matter. In a study conducted from 1990 to 1995, Rick Strassman, a University of New Mexico psychiatrist, found that some volunteers injected with high doses of DMT reported experiences with alien entities. Usually the said entities were experienced as the inhabitants of a perceived independent reality that the subjects reported visiting whilst under the influence of DMT. The enzyme monoamine oxidase breaks down DMT through a process called deamination. As a result, it is quickly inactivated when taken orally unless it is combined with a monoamine oxidase inhibitor or MAOI or MAOI. The traditional South American beverage ayahuasca or yage is derived by boiling the ayahuasca vine, also known as Banisteriopsis caapi, with leaves of one or more plants containing DMT, such as Psychotria viridis, Psychotria carthagenesis, or Diplopterus cabrerana. The ayahuasca vine contains harmala alkaloids, which are highly active reversible monoamine oxidase inhibitors, making the DMT orally active by protecting it from deamination. Various recipes are used to make the brew, depending on the purpose of the ayahuasca session or the availability of local ingredients. Two traditional sources of DMT in the western US are reed canary grass and harding grass. These invasive grasses contain small amounts of DMT and other alkaloids, and also contains gramine, which is toxic and difficult to separate. In addition, Jurema, also known as Mimosa tenuiflora, shows evidence of DMT content. The pink layer in the inner root bark of this small tree contains a high concentration of N N-Dimethyltryptamine. Taken orally with an RIMA or REMA, DMT produces a long-lasting, slow, deep metaphysical experience, similar but more intense to that of psilocybin mushrooms. However, REMAs should be used with caution. They can have lethal interactions with some prescription drugs, such as SSRI antidepressants, and some over-the-counter medicines known as sympathomimetics, such as ephedrine or certain cough medicines. It can even interact with some herbal remedies. DMT has been used in South America since pre-Columbian times. Most commonly, it is prepared as a concoction known as ayahuasca brew. Ayahuasca is an ancient sacred medicine that was originally brewed deep in the Amazon rainforest and was used to heal and transform those who drank it. The brew has been used in religious rituals, where participants sing songs of healing, meditate, and talk about their intentions before drinking a cup of ayahuasca brew. It is also used in suicide prevention and to treat disabling depression and extreme grief. Ayahuasca is often used to treat PTSD, drug and alcohol addiction, panic disorders, anxiety, sleep disorders, stress, pain, and cancer symptoms. Ayahuasca is a psychoactive tea that affects the brain and causes people to experience mood and behavioral changes. The name ayahuasca comes from the Quechua language, where aya means soul or ancestors, and huasca means vine or rope. Ayahuasca can be translated as the vine of the soul. The brew has been popular in many regions of the Amazon for centuries, for both medical and spiritual reasons. It induces an introspective dreamlike experience that includes visions and memories of the past. Nowadays, visitors from all over the world travel to these regions to participate in ayahuasca rituals. Both of the plant ingredients in ayahuasca contain hallucinogenic properties. The leaves of the Psychotria viridis plant contain dimethyltryptamine or DMT, which is a potent psychedelic compound. The Banisteriopsis caapi vine contains beta-carbolines, which are MAO inhibitors or MAOIs. MAOIs prevent the body from breaking down DMT, which allows the psychedelic effects to materialize. The ayahuasca ceremony is an event in which people can receive treatment for the spirit and take part in their own healing. Ayahuasca ceremonies are held at night, so participants arrive early in the evening. Before the ceremony begins, the participants show respect for the healer, who will lead the ceremony. The healers are called Maestro Curanderos. After introductions, the healer first prepares for the ceremony, including cleaning the space and tools with tobacco, blessings, and sacred prayers. The curanderos will light bundles of sacred tobacco and breathe the smoke into the corners of the area. They will make sure this cleaning smoke fills the room and bathes each of the participants in clouds of it as a means of purifying them and their clothing before the ritual can start. The ceremony begins in total silence as the curanderos call each participant up to drink a cup of ayahuasca. The participants come forward one at a time and receive their cup from the healer. The curanderos may also ask the participant what they wish to achieve from their spiritual journey. The participant then tells the healer precisely what they want to accomplish during their ayahuasca ceremony experience before returning to their own space in the room. Each participant is given a comfortable place to sit or lie down within a common area, so they can be observed closely by a well-trained shaman. The participant is instructed to think and then drink. This encourages them to think about the results they wish to achieve before they consume the brew. The healer then drinks his own cup of ayahuasca once all the participants have taken their own. The lights are then extinguished as the curanderos begins to sing sacred songs. The ceremony continues in darkness, and a short time later, the ayahuasca medicine begins to take effect. Music and singing are essential parts of the ayahuasca healing ritual experience. Curanderos use songs called Icaros to help communicate with spirits and seek help from the spirit realm to aid in healing the participants. Each song has its own specific purpose. The healers open each ceremony with a song that invites the spirits to join the ceremony and assist in the healing. As the participants experience the effects of the drug's healing powers, the curandero continues to sing. The healer will change their songs to change the intensity level of the experience. Early in the ceremony, the experience can be unsettling as the participants' consciousness and awareness of themselves expands. Purging often accompanies this expansion of consciousness. Vomiting is a physical cleansing process that often helps create a better ability to heal the mind. Sometimes the vomiting can be intense and frequent, but symbolizes toxins and impurities of the soul leaving the physical body. Some participants will also experience diarrhea during the purging. The healer will often take on individual patients for healing sessions. Some of these individual healing sessions will be part of larger group ceremonies. They have many different types of healings for various disorders, and most have specific songs and chants to help with the recovery of the individual affliction. During this portion of the ceremony, some patients will feel pain as the healer tries to remove any negative energy from their body. The curanderos may smudge the patient by blowing smoke or scented liquid on them, or use their hands, tobacco, or aqua florida as tools to help banish negativity. The plant spirits guide the flow of energy and experiences of the people in the group through every session. Ayahuasca ceremonies often use a particular type of tobacco, known as mapacho, that curanderos breathe onto the patient to cleanse their spirits. This act of directing the smoke onto the patient by breath is called sople. The curanderos use mapacho sople to cleanse the space, the drinking cup, and the actual ayahuasca brew. Mapacho smoke is a powerful healing tool that aids in communication with other plant spirits. During the ceremony, Patients may experience hallucinations, during which they can explore their past and their hopes and fears. They can reconcile past traumas during the healing process. Patients claim they go into a dreamlike state where things seem hyper-realistic and they can deal with traumas with new clarity. According to reports, some people feel as if they have actually gone back in time and relived their childhood moments. Participants may experience physical discomfort, like sweating, vomiting, and diarrhea, during the purging phase of treatment. These disturbances range from mild to severe, depending on the concentration of the brew and the dosage given. The success of the treatment has a lot to do with the participants' willingness to allow themselves to fully let go of all negativity and feel the effects of the drug. Patients will often hallucinate wildly during the 4 to 6 hours in which the drug works in the body. It is quite common for them to see weird scenes of melting colors and lights. They may hear bizarre sounds or feel phantom touches on their body. While the ceremony goes on, they can communicate with each other and often interact with other participants in the ceremony, sometimes assisting each other's healing process by listening to each other's stories and crying together. An Icaro is then sung to close the healing circle and end the ceremony. The curandero blesses the patients and provides them with spiritual protection, as they may feel particularly vulnerable to spiritual attacks following the ceremony. At the end of the event, the lights are lit and a brief discussion is held before the participants are dismissed to go to sleep. Often these ceremonies are done at spa-like retreats, where they are repeated a few days in a row for maximum effect. During the day, the participants are often treated to spa services to provide relaxation and help them on their spiritual journey. Yoga, massages, clean eating diets, and group activities are all used to supplement the ayahuasca ceremony on a quest for whole body wellness. DMT was first synthesized in 1931 by chemist Richard Helmut Friedrich Mansk. In general, its discovery as a natural product is credited to Brazilian chemist and microbiologist Oswaldo Gonçalves de Lima, who in 1946 isolated an alkaloid he named nigerina from the root bark of Gerima preta, that is, Mimosa tenuiflora. However, in a careful review of the case, Jonathan Ott shows that the empirical formula for nigerine, which notably contains an atom of oxygen, can only match a partial impure or contaminated form of DMT. In 1959, when Gonçalves de Lima provided American chemists with a sample of Mimosa tenuiflora roots, DMT was unequivocally identified in this plant material. Less ambiguous is the case of isolation and formal identification of DMT in 1955 in the seeds and pods of Anadenanthera peregrina by a team of American chemists led by Evan Horning. Since 1955, DMT has been found in a host of organisms. It has been found in at least 50 plant species belonging to 10 families, and in at least 4 animal species, including 1 Gorgonian coral and 3 mammalian species, including humans. In terms of a scientific understanding, the hallucinogenic properties of DMT were not discovered until 1956 by Hungarian chemist and psychiatrist Stephen Zara. In his paper, Dimethyltryptamine, its metabolism in man, the relation of its psychotic effect to the serotonin metabolism, Zara used synthetic DMT, which was then administered to 20 volunteers by injecting into a muscle. Urine samples were collected from the volunteers in order to identify DMT metabolites. This is considered to be the converging link between the chemical structure of DMT and its cultural usage as a psychoactive and religious ceremony. Another historical milestone is the discovery of DMT in plants frequently used by Amazonian natives as an additive to the vine Banisteriopsis caapi to make ayahuasca decoctions. In 1957, American chemists Francis Hochstein and Anita Paradis identified DMT in an aqueous extract of leaves of a plant they named Prestonia amazonicum and described as commonly mixed with Banisteriopsis caapi. American ethnobotanist Richard Evans Schultz and other scientists raised serious doubts about the claimed identity of Prestonia amazonica due to a lack of proper botanical identification in this study. The mistake probably led the writer William Burroughs to regard the DMT he experimented with in Tangier in 1961 as Prestonia. Better evidence was produced in 1965 by French pharmacologist Jacques Poisson. He isolated DMT as a sole alkaloid from leaves, provided and used by Agaruna Indians, and identified as having come from the vine Diplopterus cabrerana, then known as Banisteriopsis roosbeana. Published in 1970, the first identification of DMT in the plant Psychotria viridis, another common additive of ayahuasca, was made by a team of American researchers led by pharmacologist Ara de Marderosian. Not only did they detect DMT in the leaves of Psychotria viridis, obtained from Kaxinawa indigenous people, but they were also the first to identify it in a sample of an ayahuasca decoction prepared by the same indigenous people. Article 32 of the Convention on Psychotropic Substances allows nations to exempt specific traditional uses of substances from prohibition. It writes, "A state on whose territory there are plants growing wild, which contain psychotropic substances from among those in Schedule 1, and which are traditionally used by certain small, clearly determined groups in magical or religious rites, may at the time of signature, ratification or accession make reservations concerning these plants in respect of the provisions of Article 7, except for the provisions relating to international trade." However, this exemption would only apply if the plants were ever explicitly added to the schedules of the Psychotropic Convention. Currently, the convention only applies to chemicals. The commentary on the Convention on Psychotropic Substances notes, however, that the plants containing it are not subject to international control. It further writes, "The Vienna Convention does not control the cultivation of plants from which psychotropic substances are obtained. Neither the crown, fruit, mescal button of the peyote cactus, nor the roots of the plant Mimosa hostilis, nor psilocybe mushrooms themselves are included in Schedule 1, but only their respective principles, namely mescaline, DMT, and psilocin. No plants or natural materials containing DMT are currently controlled under the 1971 Convention on Psychotropic Substances. Consequently, preparations, for example decoctions made of these plants, including ayahuasca, are not under international control and therefore not subject to any of the articles of the 1971 Convention. DMT has many different names. Apart from being called the spirit molecule, it is also known as elf spice, Dimitri, Fantasia, businessman's trip, businessman special, and 45-minute psychosis. Whatever you call it, and however you take it, you now know precisely what this powerful chemical is and how it is derived. You now know that DMT is the most powerful psychedelic drug in the world. If you do decide to try it, do please take care.